Thank you so much for having me. I feel very grateful to have any opportunity to kind of share this work we're doing because I think it's quite important. And if you're not already overwhelmed by what you're reading in the media and what you're researching, I'm sure I will make your day much worse. So I apologize for that to start. So what I'm going to be talking about a bit, this is a very broad title, is partisanship, misinformation, kind of the future of democracy. And I want to start with the kind of claim or idea that Americans, also in other places, of course, but it's going to be kind of American centric, are living in kind of these alternative or alternate political realities. And what I mean by that is that a good chunk of the population is kind of seeing facts as fictions and fictions as facts as a function of their political identity or political ideology. I'm not the only one to make this claim. And in fact, my favorite study on this is not my study, which is the Thanksgiving dinner study from Chen and Rolla that you might already know, which is a quite fascinating study done also quite a while ago, where they looked at the amount of time lost at Thanksgiving dinner as a function of partisanship. So basically, they use GPS coordinates to see if people were going from, let's say, liberal areas to conservative areas and vice versa, and how much less time they kind of spent at Thanksgiving dinner, and they controlled for a bunch of other things. So it turns out the politically mismatched families tend to spend around an hour less at dinner, perhaps, arguing about Trump or different other things. So, there's a real, downstream impact of political identity and polarization in a sense on actual, degree of communication. But you might say to me, well, Anton, who really cares if you spend an hour less with Uncle Bob at dinner because he's saying some questionable things? And so we kind of base off this idea a little bit in terms of looking at the outcomes of political identity and these alternate partisan realities. We kind of took that a step further and said, well, what are some more serious kind of potential outcomes? And what we did is we did the same approach in terms of GPS coordinates. So we actually tracked around 15 million Americans during COVID-19. And what we did is we looked at their social distancing as a function of political identity. So this basically means how much they moved around, how much they went to, stores or bars or whatever it might be. And this data is aggregated at the US county level, by the way. What we find is that on average, and you probably don't find this that surprising, is that in Clinton voting counties, so counties that voted for Clinton in 2016, there was a greater reduction in movement. So, people moved around less. In a sense, they're heeding the recommendations to be careful during COVID-19 more so than in Trump voting areas. And this kind of intensified over the course of COVID. Right after 2020, things changed, but kind of intensifies over time. And there's around like a 15 to 20% difference in social distancing. Now, again, you might say, well, this is pretty obvious. Who cares really? But what we found kind of shocking in this data is that the political voting record or the political identity of a county is actually or was a 6 times stronger predictor of social distancing than the actual COVID-19 infection rate in that county at that time. So that's pretty weird, right? So this is pretty shocking, right? So it's a 6 times better predictor of my health behaviors is the political identity and voting record of my community as compared to the actual risks of infection, right? So partisan identity and rhetoric from partisan elites is really impacting my behavior much more strongly than the actual health risks. So, these are just 2 examples. There's lots of other examples, right, in terms of homophily and dating and all these types of other behaviors that indicate that Americans are in part living in these alternative partisan or political realities, right? So in terms of behavior, but also in terms of like beliefs, right? Seeing the world fundamentally in a different way, right? Where somebody's fact is somebody's fiction, somebody's fiction is somebody's fact. And these, political realities or alternate partisan realities are quite dangerous. So, for instance, we found that these partisan differences in social distancing during COVID-19 predicted greater subsequent fatalities in pro-Trump counties. So counties that voted more for Donald Trump. And this is when controlling for a number of other things. So quite literally, because of partisan identities and behaviors, kind of downstream behaviors from those identities, there are a difference in rates of death than there should have been when you control for all other factors. So really just impacting, there's nothing more impactful or more, stronger outcome than death, right? Like that's a pretty important one. So there really does seem to be these pretty severe consequences. At this point, you kind of ask, right? Given these harmful outcomes, the next question that you kind of go to, right, is like, where do these alternative realities come from? Where do these divergent behaviors come from? If we really want to change things, right, we have to understand why and where are the origins of these different ways to see the world, quite literally. Where does that come from? And one source historically, and also given their far reach, is really political elites or leaders. Right. So we know that falsehoods spread by political leaders, particularly authoritarian, nationalist, or fascist leaders, can create these kind of different realities where fictions are facts, where different types of beliefs about the world are kind of propagandized and forced on people in a way. Right. So back to George Orwell, kind of classic 1984. Right, is having the truth right in front of you, your eyes and ears. But you have to disregard that, right? You have to believe something else. So you have the truth in front of you, but you're still not really recognizing it as the truth. This idea is very well summarized by the philosopher and historian Hannah Arendt, who said the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, that is the reality of the experience, no longer exists. I think we often, right, when we think of authoritarianism or nationalism or fascism, we tend to think of the liberties that are removed, right, of the power structures, potentially of violence, right, if we're thinking about it currently too, maybe, a secret police force, all these kind of things. But we tend to forget that actually, right, the structure around what is true and false, the structure around what can be considered, verifiable, all these kind of things start to become blurred, right? The reality of the experience starts to become blurred. So it's not only these kind of power outcomes, but also kind of these epistemic outcomes in terms of what you think and believe. So the idea here, in a sense, is that political elites or elites generally can create alternative realities by peddling falsehoods or false narratives to a population. And the question is then, how do you begin to kind of test this? And one way we did this is we prompt engineered GPT-4o. You can do this with other models too, but I'm just going to talk about those results to kind of quantify the degree of falsehoods in political leaders' rhetoric. So this is basically, right, you have a political leader, whoever it is, you take texts, maybe a speech they're saying, maybe a social media post, and you see if you can have an LLM kind of quantify what they're saying in terms of the degree of falsehood accurately. And if you can do that, right, then you can look at kind of text or speeches at scale. And just to be clear here, when I'm talking about falsehoods, I'm not just talking about, right, like I got a date wrong when I was saying something, right? Like it was 1985, not 1984, George Orwell, right? Like it's not something as pedantic as that. It's not just false information in a sense, but it's more, right, certainty around a falsehood, right? Really trying to present a fictional narrative as fact. One of the first things we did with this LLM, which we kind of verified in a number of different ways, which we can talk about later if you want, is we evaluated around 26,000 US presidential speech excerpts. So these go across, I think, like 1800 to 2016 or something, for the degree of kind of this treating fictions as facts. I'll give you an example of kind of a political elite statement or leader statement, and then the evaluation of the LLM. So for instance, you have Trump saying, lawmakers in New York cheered with delight upon the passage of legislation that would allow a baby to be ripped from the mother's womb. I don't need to tell you that this is false. It is false. And our model, which rates statements on a scale from 1 to 7, so 1 being a very low degree of falsehood and 7 a very high degree, would evaluate this as a 7. So it does evaluate it as a 7. It says, this statement reflects a very high degree of falsehood. It asserts extreme and inflammatory claims that are not supported by real world evidence. So just to give you an example of what this looks like. You'll notice that if we quantify all the presidents in the US as a function of the amount of falsehoods that they claimed in their speeches, that there is a pretty massive outlier. Again, I don't think that's so surprising. At the same time, I'd like you to appreciate the effect size here. Those little bars around the dots are standard errors. This is a pretty enormous effect. It's really not business as usual. It's a seismic shift, right? So in a sense, it is not as if this has been a trend in the making, or even that Republicans have started to, Republican presidents have used more falsehoods historically or something like this. It really is an outlier. So, when we ring the alarm bells and say the house is on fire, there's a pretty good reason for that. It seems like the data do support this idea that this is a very different experience in the degree to which a political leader is, in a sense, lying to the population. We don't want to be only US centric, so we also applied our LLM to around 90,000 tweets of German politicians. This is during the 2017 federal election. And what we find is a bit of a parallel in the sense that the alt-right or the far right, which is the AfD on the far left here, uses an enormous amount more falsehoods in their social media posts than the other parties in Germany. Again, this is not business as usual. This is a pretty enormous difference. And to kind of go away from false equivalencies, Die Linke, which is perceived as the far left in Germany, does not exhibit this degree of falsehoods. Actually, they're quite similar to the other parties. So it's not as if there are two extreme groups here, or extremism generally in terms of political extremism, just in terms of non-normative, right? Not in terms of inflammatory. That doesn't per se predict falsehoods. It really seems to be kind of an issue in terms of the far right at the moment. We can also look at this more recently. So these are tweets from 2025. So they're actually around the last 500 tweets of around 36 politicians. So 6 politicians per party in Germany. And you'll notice that the BSV, which is a splinter group from Die Linke, is also quite high in falsehoods. Also, a funny little coincidence here is that the AfD and the BSV are both groups that are funded indirectly, or let's be honest, directly by Russia. So maybe there's an interesting kind of overlap there to think about. So at this point, you might say to me, well, this is, all well and good. You are documenting, right, that there are different degrees of falsehoods as a function of political party. But does it even really matter, right? Like, do falsehoods actually matter, right? Isn't it sometimes kind of funny when a political leader says something that is patently false or stupid in a way? We kind of laugh it off, right? We say, of course, the Haitian immigrants are not eating the pets. That's an absurd thing, right? It almost makes you kind of, in a weird, shocked way, laugh. But does it actually matter? Does it have an impact? In a sense, there's this kind of counter argument of, are we having a moral panic over misinformation? And I know Steve has talked a lot about this, and I would add more kind of data and evidence to suggest that no, this is not a moral panic, and this type of misinformation is quite problematic. And to look into that, one of the things we looked at was, do these falsehoods by elite leaders fuel polarization and political violence? So one thing we looked at, for instance, is does the degree of falsehoods in a given year of a U.S. president in their speeches, does that predict subsequent events of political violence in the next year? So things like mobs, riots, assassination attempts, right? We're seeing this more and more at the moment in the U.S. in terms of politically violent events. And it turns out it does. The degree of falsehood, so the degree a political leader, in a sense, or US president lies in their speeches, the more political violence follows. And this relationship holds, by the way, when you take out that sneaky little outlier on the top right, just in case you're curious. If we use our data in terms of like a predictive function, according to our data, Trump's rhetoric compared to Biden's predicts around a twofold increase in violent political events per year. And interestingly, during Trump's first term, there was a sharp increase of political violence during those 4 years from before. But when Biden took office, actually, that went right back down to relatively normal rates. And then when Trump again took office, it skyrocketed again. So it really does seem to be the case that it's not just a general trend in a sense towards violence, but that there is some impact of political elites or leaders specifically communicating falsehoods that has this effect, rather than just a general, inflammatory trend in society. We also looked at the German political leaders' tweets that I showed you a second ago in terms of do they result or do they, well, it is in a sense causal, do they result in a greater amount of replies to their tweets that include calls for political violence? Or rhetoric that kind of encourages political violence. And we also find this. So the degree of misinformation or falsehood in German politicians' tweets, and this is in the 2017 federal election, predicts a higher amount of replies that kind of support political violence. We've looked at this in a number of different ways. This can be done as continuous. You can also kind of do it binary in terms of like real calls for violence, and we find similar results there. That being said, it's good to kind of move these ideas and this data into a more kind of controlled experimental setting. One way we did that is we looked at the debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. What we did is we took all the statements from the debate, and the statements here are always like, 2-3 sentences. And we had our LLM or a prompt engineered LLM, right, evaluate them in terms of the degree of falsehood. So, for instance, right, the Springfield, the Haitian immigrants are eating cats and dogs, which is obviously false, is evaluated as a very high in falsehood. And what we do is we show these statements. So some of them are just general policy statements, right? So they're low in falsehood, and some of them are statements like this. And we show this to, let's say 500, 600 participants, and then we examine how they respond after reading those statements. And what we generally find is that after reading the falsehoods, participants tend to support political violence more. They tend to answer, questions like, given the state of the country, violence might be needed to move things in the right direction, or whatever it might be, right? We generally find that after reading the falsehoods, people do express a greater support for political violence as compared to kind of the more general policy statement things. And this is driven by a pretty massive effect of affective polarization, right? So that's this negative attitudes towards the political outgroup. I think this kind of data can kind of start to help explain things like January 6th, right, which was kind of motivated by the big lie that the election was stolen. Also, very interestingly, in these data, we find that these effects hold kind of across demographics. So we find the effects for men and women. We find the effects for people who are married or not married. We find them for people who are high SES, low SES. We also find them across political party, et cetera, et cetera. So these seem to be pretty generalizable effects on support for political violence, which might help explain a little bit why the perpetrators of January 6th were so diverse. There was actually a surprising amount of diversity among these insurrectionists. A lot of them, were married. They had jobs. This is not actually something that is very usual for perpetrators of political violence. In a sense, it's kind of a different form of political violence, one perpetrated by kind of mass falsehoods, mass delusions, alternative political realities, rather than some fringe conspiracy theory that is, somebody goes down a rabbit hole on YouTube or whatever it might be. So a very different form of political violence that we're kind of used to in the U.S. And something that might very much increase and be somewhat unique to this kind of misinformation or elite misinformation, given that elite misinformation reaches such a large group of people and can be believed by such a large group of people, given political identities, while kind of QAnon, more kind of fringe things, are not really typically furthered by these kind of elite leaders or political leaders. That being all said, of course, our ultimatum, our ultimate goal, in a sense, is to try and reduce these kind of events. Yet it's quite difficult to change political leaders' rhetoric. I'm not going to get a grant anytime soon that allows me to follow around Donald Trump and tell him that he should stop lying. So what we did is we kind of focused on, well, if we can't really change the leaders, maybe we can change the way that these falsehoods spread, right? So once a falsehood is kind of claimed by a leader or a falsehood is perpetrated online in some way, right? Can we attenuate the spread of that falsehood? So in terms of like information spread. One thing we've done to look at this is kind of a large scale intervention on misinformation sharing. So surprisingly, there's been very little research kind of comparing different interventions or strategies against one another in terms of reducing false news sharing or misinformation sharing. So what we did is we showed participants false and kind of true news or claims, and we tested a number of different interventions against one another in terms of their efficacy. So for instance, we had an accuracy prompt, which is a very popular kind of intervention. Gordon Pennycook and Dave Rand and other people work on this. And the accuracy prompt basically is around the idea that people share false news or misinformation because they're not thinking about accuracy in the moment. And so by having this prompt to think about accuracy, it reduces misinformation sharing. There's also warning labels, right? We actually used the one that was trialed out by Facebook for a while. So it's this kind of overlay over the false information that says this is false information, right? It's been kind of flagged, but you can still see the content underneath. It's just kind of like a kind of flag. We also did a social norm intervention. I think this is work by guests and others. In this, right, it's this idea of normative or injunctive norms, and like it's bad, right? Most people think it's bad to share false news. And we also included a media literacy tips intervention. So this is basically a boosting intervention in terms of trying to teach people different cues or tips to spot fake news so that they don't share it. This is what we find. Generally, warning labels are very, very effective at reducing the sharing of false news. So are media literacy tips. So they reduce the sharing of false news by like 13-14%, or between 8% and 15%, depending on what controls you add. Media literacy tips also, interestingly, increase true news sharing, which is cool. Social norms are also a bit effective. We actually find no effect really of accuracy prompts. This is in part because we realized that the effect size of accuracy prompts in past research has actually been quite small, but they tend to be very, very large samples. So theoretically, our null finding here, or technically our null finding here, doesn't actually go against the past research in the sense that it actually is in the range of what the effect size would be. It's just that most of that past research has very, very large sample sizes, and the effect size is quite small, which is exactly, in a sense, the point of comparing interventions to one another, right? So you can kind of see the actual efficacy in terms of strength comparatively. Media literacy tips, I think, are a pretty good way to move forward in terms of how to reduce misinformation sharing, especially given that they work just as well as something as so obviously salient and intense as a warning label. There are also some aspects of warning labels that might be a little complicated in terms of reduced efficacy over time and other types of things. But we can talk more about kind of the details of which interventions would be more or less scalable. Also, media literacy tips, as I mentioned, actually increase true news sharing, which is quite good, right? Because you can kind of make more of the argument to platforms that this won't reduce overall sharing, right? So because platforms are very interested in keeping people on the platform and sharing more, right? So that's kind of a positive there. There are tons of actually effective ways, right, to reduce misinformation sharing. So there are other ways, such as AI misinformation classifiers, kind of like the LLM approach we did, right, where you could use artificial intelligence to accurately detect false news or misinformation and then remove it. Of course, this is not the easiest thing in the world. A lot of people working on this, but it definitely is a possibility. Much simpler is actually just banning repeat offenders. So, right, you probably know some of these statistics, but 1% of users accounted for around 80% of exposure to fake news sources during the 2016 US election. What is it? 800 super spreaders were actually responsible for like 35% of all of the shared false news or false information during COVID-19. I mean, right? Like there's a pretty simple way to massively reduce misinformation online, and that is to ban these repeat offenders, right? If we also go back to like how information spread works, it's much more likely to be broadcast, as in one person who has a lot of influence shares something, and then a lot of other people see it, and a couple of them share a little bit, than actually viral. So viral things on the internet generally not actually viral. They tend to be broadcast, as in spread by a specific, like a small amount of very influential people. So we definitely have ways, to deal with this. I saw a good one the other day where it was like somebody asked Gronk, who are the most prolific spreaders of misinformation on X, and it was like, well, Elon Musk is number one. So that was quite funny. So yeah, we definitely have like that would be the way to do it. Of course, social media companies resist these solutions. They end fact-checking programs due to political pressure, or quite literally just become propaganda machines. There's also another factor that makes it quite difficult to deal with misinformation online and how it spreads, and that is there is a lot of nation-driven misinformation warfare. I'll give you a weirdly interesting one. If you think back to Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, could you maybe like do the little thumbs up or raise your hand or whatever if you think that Johnny Depp was kind of in the right? Okay. If you think that Amber Heard was in the right, can you put your thumb up? Okay. Cool. Yeah. So it's kind of wild because in the beginning, right, everybody was like Johnny Depp done, right? Like nobody, like this guy, man, did you hear what he did? Right. It was all kind of negative sentiment and attitudes towards Johnny Depp in terms of what we had learned. And that sentiment, that public consensus kind of started to shift. Suddenly, right, Amber Heard, oh wow, I can't believe she did those things. Actually, Amber Heard won a case, a civil case, a court case in the UK. And then there was another one in the US that Johnny then won, and that was later in time. And during that period of time, it really seemed like the public sentiment had shifted, both offline and online. And it turns out that online, around 200 to 250,000 bots had started to kind of aggressively push the narrative that Johnny Depp is, good guy, and that Amber Heard is terrible. And it turns out that those 200 to 250,000 bots were actually driven by a specific country. So they were actually most of the bot army of a specific country that had been readapted to basically push pro Johnny Depp narratives for months. So does anyone have a guess what country these bots were from? And if you already know, then don't say it.
Russia is always my first guess.
Well, I'm
That
guessing it
great.
wasn't Russia because that's too easy.
That's
So
correct. It is too easy. Yeah, it's not Russia.
Iran.
Nope. Close
The
though.
US.
Nope.
Saudi Arabia.
Very
India.
nice. Yeah, it's Saudi. So Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi bots turned from being very pro Saudi Arabia online to suddenly becoming very pro Johnny Depp. It's very interesting. I guess they really like people really like Saudi and Johnny Depp. There's a nice correlation there. No, it turns out in reality, the answer is just so disturbingly simple and banal that it just hurts a little bit, which is that MBS and Johnny Depp are just friends. That's it. Right. So this is pretty wild, right? Because this happened. We often don't know about it. I love including it as an example because we know about all these different right Russian interference, whatever. But here is an example where like a bot army and misinformation really just changed sentiment. Also of people who were not really online, right? Who suddenly were like, right, the public talk just kind of the mood shifted that we weirdly don't really know about. So it's it's who you know who helps. Yeah, no, 100%. It's yeah. Or in German, we would say it's Vitamin B, which is Vitamin Beziehung, which means vitamin relationships is what helps you get your apartment and apparently helps you win a court case against Amber Heard. But it's a wonderful example in terms of the it's become so normalized in a sense, misinformation and the elite's use of bots, misinformation, these types of things that we don't even know this example, even though, I think in the past this would have been quite shocking as a revelation. Here's another one that's kind of frightening. If you open an X account or a TikTok account in Germany, and all you do is you follow the main political parties. So the AfD, CDU, SPD, whatever. You don't scroll. You don't like anything. You don't look at anything. So if you do this, it's just you like them, right? You just follow them. Sorry. So if your name is Hans and you're 19 and you're living in Saxony and you just follow the main political parties, you will get 9 times more positive AfD content. 9 times, right? That's that's pretty wild. So, if you're Hans and you're sitting in Saxony, from a Bayesian perspective and from a just rational perspective, if you vote for the AfD, you're doing the right thing because after all, you've gotten 9 times more positive content, right? So these information ecosystems are quite biased, and the dead internet theory is getting better and better. Long story short, aside from scaring you a bit, it is very difficult to change the misinformation ecosystem, right? A lot of the actors at the top don't want it to change. There are, basically AI algorithms that try to promote news that is inflammatory because then that means more clicks and more revenue. Right. So it's not intentionally trying to do this, but it happens. And it's easy to ignore that if your main goal is profit. So these ecosystems are dreadfully difficult to change. And so as a little research group, you can see us kind of getting boxed in the corner, right? We can't change the elites rhetoric. We can't really change the misinformation flow and the ecosystem. So we kind of pivoted and said something a little strange, which is what we said was, what if we allow people to get misinformation and we allow them to have false beliefs. In a sense, we allow them to live in alternate political realities. But what if we just make sure they don't do anything stupid? Right? They can have these beliefs, but as long as they don't act on them in antisocial or harmful ways, that's okay, right? So maybe what we can do is we can just try to intervene on the link between holding the false belief and actually committing some act of violence or acting in an antisocial way. And to do this, we developed this little theoretical model around when false beliefs lead to antisocial outcomes. And what we say is that if you hold a false belief in something we call misplaced certainty, that this activates threat and in turn antisocial behaviors. So let me tell you what misplaced certainty is. So misplaced certainty is holding a belief with complete certainty or a very, very high degree of certainty. So I really mean, right, treating your belief as if it were knowledge. Right? So a very, very strong confidence, a high degree of conviction in a sense. And it's that combined with, at the same time, perceiving opposition towards that belief, right? So I am very, very certain in something, and I perceive a lot of opposition in terms of evidence, in terms of what other people are saying. In a sense, I feel like my certainty or my knowledge is being threatened. So the epistemic structure of misplaced certainty is kind of along the lines of I'm certain of X, where X is some belief, but people think X lacks evidence and or is wrong. So the public consensus, in a sense, is against me. I'll give you an example. So I could be like, I'm certain vaccines cause autism, right? But the scientific evidence and most people disagree with me, right? So I think I have evidence, right? I keep having that debunked paper, and I smash it in everyone's face. But right, generally, I get a lot of opposition, right? There's a lot of people who are like, no, that is completely wrong. Like, what are you talking about? Stop being so silly. What internet wormhole did you go down? Right. So it really is this conflict between feeling like I have prized special knowledge, right? I have the secret knowledge in a way, and everybody else is against it. So I start to feel like an activist, a missionary, right? I need to deal with this conflict in some way, right? So this is the idea in terms of I hold a belief or a false belief like vaccines cause autism. If I hold it in this structure, I'm really, really certain it's true, and I feel all this opposition, that is really, really likely to induce threat, right? And not only is it have this threat component, it also makes me kind of feel a little bit powerful, right? Because I have this special knowledge, right? So I know something that most people don't know, right? Which makes me have this little epistemic arrogance in a sense. But I'm still experiencing a ton of threat against that certainty and that arrogance. And as we know from age-old research, if I experience threat, right, I can, fight, flight, befriend, right? And one of those is fight in terms of antisocial behaviors. Flight will be maybe ignoring other people, right? Being like, shut up, don't talk to me. And befriend can be finding other kind of extremists who also believe these things that I can team up with, right? So in a sense, joining these extreme movements or echo chambers. We've done a bunch of studies on this. So there's over like 10 studies and 5,000 participants. I'll give you an example of what these results kind of usually look like. So we usually include a control condition called well-placed certainty. So well-placed certainty is when I feel certain about something that most people actually agree with, right? So for instance, I can be like, I feel certain climate change exists, and there is a scientific basis for this. It seems like most scientists agree with me, and it actually seems like most people agree with me, even in the U.S. Right, and more than average people believe that climate change is real. So now, in a weird sense, I don't feel very threatened by this, right? And actually, counterintuitively, it can help explain a little bit why we're not doing enough about climate change. Is because I hold this certainty that there's a problem. But if everyone agrees with me, if I think everyone agrees with me, well, somebody's going to take care of it, right? So, so this actually leads to pretty low levels of threat. We also have misplaced belief, which is like misplaced certainty. So, but with like lower levels of certainty. So I still have a little bit of doubt. So, for instance, I could be like, I think vaccines cause autism, but I'm not entirely sure, right? And I think most people disagree with this idea, but I kind of think it, but I'm not sure, right? So it's not this full level of certainty or conviction. And then we have misplaced certainty, which tends to kind of create the highest levels of threat. This threat, in turn, then directly predicts antisocial outcomes. So including things like support for political violence, support for, violence directly servicing that belief that I hold, right? That misplaced certainty that I hold, that belief content, things like joining extreme groups, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now if we know this, or if we've kind of developed this theoretical model, we can kind of create interventions to reduce these antisocial outcomes, right? And one way to do that is to specifically, right, focus on a threat, since it is kind of the mechanism, the pathway that leads to antisocial outcomes. So one way to do this is kind of a simple cognitive reappraisal intervention, right? So we're going to change the way people are thinking about their belief, the situation, to reduce the amount of threat they're feeling, right? So we could say things like, people aren't trying to hurt you. It's it's okay. Everyone holds different beliefs. That doesn't mean that they're threatening you, right? We can try to downregulate threat in this way, counterintuitively and also kind of funnily. You can also tell people that actually people on anonymous surveys, people actually do agree with you. Most people do agree with you. Or like we ran a survey with implicit measures, and it turns out that like No, you're like most people do think vaccines cause autism. And counterintuitively, this actually reduces threat and then reduces these antisocial outcomes. So it's a bit counterintuitive that kind of providing support for the belief reduces the antisocial outcome or the aggression or violence in response, which is kind of counterintuitive. You can also do things like target superordinate goals, making people realize that actually, for instance, most Americans across the political spectrum have shared goals, like living in a prosperous, safe society. So, for instance, this is actually, I kind of hid this for you in the debate study. We had another condition where we had participants think about superordinate goals of Americans, and that Americans are actually not as polarized as people think. And they thought about that right after reading the falsehoods from the debate. And this pretty effectively reduces the degree of support for political violence. So there are some ways that we can kind of target these processes to try and intervene. Just a couple takeaways. So the first thing I kind of talked about is this idea of alternative political or partisan realities. Um, that these exist and have pretty severe consequences, right? Not only do they reduce the amount of time you spend with your family at Thanksgiving, they also might kill you because you behave differently in terms of health recommendations. We kind of talked about how these alternative realities or different belief systems can be created by political leaders, right? Political leaders have a wide reach, right? They have a large audience. There's kind of trust in them. They can use things like threat and polarization in their favor to really create and maintain these fictional realities, these political realities. We talked about how the falsehoods they spread in order to create those realities can also fuel political violence, right? In terms of, for instance, kind of expressing falsehoods in German politician leaders' tweets leads directly to greater replies and support for political violence. We talked about how since we can't really change political leaders, right, maybe we can change how misinformation spreads. But it turns out most social media platforms, even if we have effective strategies to reduce misinformation spread, are not really going to let us use them or apply them at scale. Of course, there are some exceptions, right? YouTube did some really great stuff working together with Senator van der Linden and others. But generally, right, these platforms are going to be a bit resistant. And finally, we were like, well, if we can't change leaders or the environments, right, maybe we can kind of stop people from acting on the misinformation or acting on the false beliefs. So basically, we're saying, we'll let them be extremists in terms of thought as long as they don't actually act on it. And I'll leave you with the paradox of tolerance by Karl Popper. And the paradox of tolerance basically says that if we want our tolerant society to survive, we have to be intolerant of intolerance. Right. So this means, in a sense, that we can't stand back as a tolerant society and be tolerant of those who do not stand for our society or who are intolerant of members of our society or things like that. Right. We have to be intolerant of intolerance. And I think for a long time, we've made this mistake with misinformation in the sense that for too long, we've fallen into this trap of kind of treating misinformation as free speech, despite its clear potential for harm. And I think I've shown you today that it has clear potential for harm. And it's interesting because I always get a lot of pushback on this, but at the same time, right, we regulate other things that are potentially harmful in society, right? We regulate how you drive. We regulate what you eat. We regulate the medicines you take, right? These are all things we regulate because they have the potential for harm. It seems pretty clear here to me that misinformation or falsehoods, especially propaganda, has the potential for harm and must be regulated in a sense to keep a tolerant society tolerant. Now, in no way am I suggesting that we do this once the fox is already in the henhouse, right? So once the society is already intolerant, which the US currently is arguably, right, the idea to retroactively apply this is not going to work, right? Because those in power are not going to, let's say, filter out the correct things, right? So you have to kind of do it before. Here in Europe, we still have quite an opportunity to do this. And generally, my talk is a bit of a warning call to, make these changes and regulate social medias and really ensure that this misinformation ecosystem is disrupted before the fox is also here in the henhouse. All right. Thanks so much. On the left is a QR code for my website. On the right is a QR code to a recording of this talk in case you want to look at it again. It's a bit of an earlier version, but